Oh, hi there. So you might be wondering, why I'm kicked back with a Chromebook just hanging out next to my thigh. So this is going to be a little bit different of a video today. I wanted to more casually talk about some extended thoughts about Live Alive, and the reason I'm like super lounged back, looking extra comf today is because I sprained my ankle, and here's some B-roll of what it looks like dunked in water.
It's so freaking cold!
So I had like a ton of extra thoughts that I really wanted to get out there about the new action RPG from Japan called Live Alive, and I couldn't condense enough into that quick review that I did of it. I guess you could say that about all of my quick reviews. So Live Alive is unlike anything that I've ever played. So first off, I'm going to talk about my history with this game. There is none, because I never heard of it. Which, to be honest, actually kind of surprises me, because I've played a lot of Japanese RPGs back in the day. Like, whenever I was younger, and my cousin introduced me to Final Fantasy II on the Super Nintendo, which is actually Final Fantasy IV over here in North America, I was completely hooked. Also, did you guys like my complete knowledge flex there? I'm one of the people who knew that Final Fantasy II is actually Final Fantasy IV. But Live Alive is just one of those I just never came across, never even heard of it. Like, no one I knew ever talked about it, never saw it online. Like, I'm kind of surprised. I've never seen this piece of media whatsoever. And then the more I found out about it, the more I was like, wow, that sounds a lot like Octopath Traveler. And lo and behold, Octopath is like directly inspired by Live Alive, so I'm like, I gotta check this game out. So it's the next game in Square's HD 2D set of games, and honestly, these have all been fantastic so far, and I'm so gonna be there for when Dragon Quest III gets its HD 2D remake. I've never played Dragon Quest III, so now's the perfect time to get into it.
Maybe I should actually play this.
So Live Alive has 7 different scenarios that you play throughout. So you have like the Imperial China scenario, you have the present day, you have the distant future, these kinds of things. Each one of these scenarios takes place throughout a different time period, and that kind of comes into play later, but I don't want to spoil anything yet. So I'm not gonna talk too much about that right now. Each one of these scenarios, I'm gonna say, is like an hour to like 3 hours in length. So it's not really long, it's kind of like a bunch of short stories. It makes it very approachable for someone like me who I feel like I'm really busy and I don't have time to devote to a lot of JRPGs nowadays. So when I heard that this was like pretty digestible, I jumped right on it. And I'm very happy I did. This has a really unique take on combat for an RPG. I don't know if I've ever seen anything like this. So the combat in this game is like this grid-based thing. So it has this mix of like turn-based, but also like strategy RPG elements. The combat is like really solid, but at the same time, I feel like the level of difficulty completely ranges, depending on how much you actually play the game. So some chapters, I feel like the difficulty is very well balanced, and you feel like when you're going throughout it, that you're actually getting a decent challenge, and you don't have to grind or anything. And then some of the chapters, you're just wiping the f*** out of everything. The combat in and of itself is really fun. It's just the fact that in almost every single scenario, you start out like really high and you're having a good time and you're like getting really into it and you're having fun. And then you have a lull throughout the center of the story where you're just fighting the same shit over and over again, but you don't want to be underleveled for when you go fight the boss. So you kind of just keep grinding throughout this because you're like, well, I feel like I need to fight some of these enemies so I don't get my ass handed to me at the end. But this is also miserable. Now, I will say there are some of the chapters like the present day and the Wild West who I feel like handle this really well. And then there are some chapters, like I said in my quick review, like Twilight of Edo Japan, where, I mean, I'm not kidding, I literally fell asleep one night while I played this game. I think I was out for like an hour. So Yoko Shimomura, who, you know, you may know from little indie games such as Final Fantasy and Kingdom Hearts and the Mario and Luigi games, she did the original music for this back in the day, and I think if I remember right, I think this was like one of her first games that she actually composed for, and man, this is a really solid, pretty solid OST to begin with there, Yoko. So she did the music for this back in the day, and they actually brought her back to work on the remake, and man, I'm so glad that they did, because these new arrangements are absolutely amazing. In my opinion, they completely nailed the emotional like highs and lows and the proper beats in all of these remade soundtracks, especially in Megalomania. Every time this song comes on and starts to ramp up in the cutscene right before the fight, and then it transitions to the fight, dude, it makes me feel like I can punch the fucking sun.
Heavenly peaks descend!
That's some good stuff. Honestly, one thing that I haven't really touched on yet is how much the voice acting actually adds to this game. Dude, it's impressive. But because this is an HD 2D game by Square Enix, you bet there's some cheese.
Well, don't keep me waiting now.
Oh,
He sounds so stupid. Okay, so those are some of my general thoughts about the game and the improvements and all that good stuff. I will now proceed to dive into each chapter because this is an extended video and we're gonna get into the nitty gritty. I love the complete, like, late 80s vibes that this introduces. So the main character that you play as, and I'm gonna butcher the crap out of this, is, I believe it's like, Masaru Takahara. I'm gonna check Wikipedia. Yeah, I think I got that right. So this was actually the first one that I beat, and I gotta say, this is my favorite in terms of combat. I never felt like this chapter slowed any way, because this one's basically just like a boss rush mode. Like, you go throughout I believe there's 6 main fighters that you have to fight, and it's kind of like a Street Fighter, like the World Warrior scenario, where you're just fighting each of these champions from across the continent. And as you go throughout these, you can actually pick up skills from your opponents, and you have to learn, like, their main moves. And you can't kill them too quickly, because you actually want to give your character time to learn those moves, because it's going to make you better when you actually get to the last boss fight. I thought this was a really cool mechanic. It's almost like Masaru is like a ditto. It was also a really nice condensed storyline that actually just kept the focus sorely on the action, and I never felt bored going throughout it. The only thing about it that I wish was a little bit better is I just wish it was a little longer, because I was having so much fun, like, going throughout these. But I do understand you got to balance it really well. You can't make it too long, because then you run the risk of making people feel like they're just doing the same thing over and over again for like 3 hours. I don't really have a whole lot else to say about this one, because it is just so straightforward. I mean, you have your character introduction, which is like 10 minutes, and then you start fighting people, and then you beat them, and then you go fight some more. So the distant future, this is arguably the most different of all the scenarios in the entire game. So the main character that you play as is a robot named Cube, and I already love the irony in that name. So I started playing this one in the demo, but I actually didn't jump back in and finish it immediately, because I kind of wanted to explore something else whenever I first got the game. But I was so interested to know what actually happened, because the demo just cuts you off right at a huge cliffhanger, and I was just like completely dumbfounded and annoyed that they did that, even though I know why, because marketing. So the reason why this scenario is so much different than the others is because there's virtually no combat in this entire story. It kind of plays out almost like a horror movie. It made me feel like the original Alien movie, where you feel like something is kind of like lurking in the shadows and hunting you whenever you're going throughout this entire scenario. There is a level of tension here that I'm really impressed that they actually achieved, given the fact that this is only like, what, like a 2.5 hour scenario? I mean, you gotta factor in like the fact that you're spending 30 minutes walking around trying to figure out what to do. But like, I love horror stuff, and this kind of really invoked those horror mystery like vibes. I really liked it a lot. So like, the main story beats that I'll kind of go throughout here without spoiling too much is you're this robot that's been built by one of the crew members, and there's a handful of crew members on here, and you're basically traveling back to Earth, and you have this cargo, which may or may not be a really big monster who's locked up, and you can probably guess what happens.
Yep.
And the little bit of combat that you do get is actually really fun, and it feels kind of like a breath of fresh air, because you've gone so long without really having any. But in this chapter, what makes it so interesting is some of it takes place just inside this like computer game that is in this wreck area, and then you get some at the end when you have a boss fight, but otherwise, there's no combat. And I actually really liked that a lot. So after I did the distant future, I jumped right back into the Imperial China storyline, because it was one that I started in the demo, and I did enjoy the first half of it, and I kind of wanted to see where the characters went. I think this is probably the best all-around chapter. I think most people are going to resonate with this one probably more than some of the other ones. This is definitely one of the most like classic JRPG scenarios that you're going to get out of Live Alive. I say this has some of the best paced combat in the game. Like, there's not really a lot of those moments where you feel like you're just kind of slogging through shit while you're playing the game, like with some of the other chapters. And I feel like overall this has a pretty good story about like redemption and, you know, getting out of your shell and that kind of thing. You know, it hits some of those good emotional beats that you want. And I'm not gonna lie, definitely brought out the feels in a couple of scenes. They got kind of ballsy with some of the stuff in this chapter. So the main storyline here is you have the master Shifu, who needs to pass down his kung fu, I almost wanted to say kung fu-ness. So he wants to pass down like his kung fu training and his knowledge to, you know, disciples or the next generation, and he doesn't know who to give it to, so he has to go out and recruit people. And there was a couple times playing this, I was like, man, kind of wish Shifu was my grandpa.
True strength is more than the power to defeat your enemy. It is the power to defend yourself and that which you hold dear.
This guy's wise as So before I talk about the next chapter, I want to say, it's about this time, whenever I was playing the game, that I started noticing that the bosses so far all kind of have a similar name. And that's where I'm going to leave that until later on in the video. I really wanted to like this chapter. Like, I really did. There are way too many fights that are just an absolute snooze fest. I hate exploring this castle. I just thought it was boring. I thought it was awkwardly laid out. I mean, the exploring was kind of cool, and there were parts where it was interesting, but as the whole, I was just like, I'm ready for this chapter to be over. But I want to talk about some of the things that I did like about this chapter. So first off, I thought it started really strong. I thought it was really cool. I liked that they basically said, here's your mission. We're going to drop you right into it, and then we're just going to let you go. Which, in 1994, that was probably like really innovative and interesting back then. It's one of the only JRPGs that I can really think of that kind of presents a scenario like this, where they're just like, here's a big area, and we're just going to let you explore it however you see fit. There are multiple ways to infiltrate this castle. So you start out in this village, and you have to basically figure out one of, I think, 3 or 4 ways to get inside this castle. And then you can explore the castle however you want. You just got to get to the top somehow. But one of the things that makes this the most unique chapter out of any of them is the fact that you can do a pacifist run, like an Undertale. And that's like really cool. And I've seen multiple people already tell me like, hey, Jacob, you should do a pacifist run of this next time because it's way better. And I think I'm going to. I think this is the one chapter that definitely has the most replay value because of that scenario. So like I went in and I just decided to pull up my big boy pants and just kill everything like how you do in most JRPGs, because that's what I was used to and that's what I wanted to do. That makes me sound like a psychopath. So as I'm going throughout this, like as I've stated before, dude, it was just boring. You have the exact same fighting scenario over and over and over again. So if I do ever play this again, I'm definitely going to go that route, because I think this chapter starts really strong and it ends really strong. It's just that big chunky middle portion that I was just so bored in. But hey, beautiful scenery though. So the prehistoric scenario has you taking control of a character named Pogo. And this chapter is interesting because, so obviously it's caveman-like, it's prehistoric, so they're really playing on the fact that there wasn't really an established language back in the day. So when you're going throughout this, you don't really have any like actual dialogue to go off of. You just have a lot of grunts and moans and sounds, and there's actually a scene at the end where it's like the funniest climax scene I've ever seen in a video game.
Rated T for teen.
But then there's like fart jokes. And you know, I'm all about jokes and being goofy, but like fart jokes are just like super lame in my opinion. Now I'm like super self-conscious that someone's gonna go back and like watch my old videos and try to like find a fart sound. This was just the one chapter that I knew going into it, I was just like, man, I'm not gonna be into this. It's just gonna have corny slapstick crap in it that I just don't care about. And like, maybe I didn't give it a fair shake, but this was kind of another chapter I was like really mixed on, because there are some elements about this that I really like. So as you're going throughout the world and as you go throughout some of the fighting, you can collect parts and then you can go visit people to make those parts into something. So like you can make a hammer out of like a stick and stone. That level of customization is actually really cool, and I kind of wish more of the other chapters had that. But nope, they stuck it in with Pogo and his monkey, and they just make fart jokes. So I feel like the game started out strong, and it kind of lulled a little bit there in the middle with those last 2 chapters. And now we're back, baby. So maybe some people won't think this is the best, like, objectively, but in my opinion, this is my favorite all-around chapter in the entire game. So the Wild West has you take control of the Sundown Kid, and you're basically, like, on the run from people. This is an extremely well-rounded story with great combat, really funny character interactions. I cannot get over how good this scenario was. And man, it is too damn short. So the main gimmick of this one is that you're basically going to this town. This town's getting overrun by people who are doing bad shit. and need to be taken out. But what I like so much about this one is that you get to be a part of this town kind of coming to this realization that like, hey, maybe we don't have to stand by and get treated like ass. So part of that is you and like your basically arch nemesis here, aka the Man in Black, who's actually purple. You basically join forces and you team up and you go around and you set up traps and you help the townspeople like home alone their entire town. And there's this level of tension as you're going throughout the exploration phase because you only have a certain amount of time to explore this entire town and to give the goods to the townspeople to set up traps. So when I was doing it, I think the only traps that I actually got set up were like laying some carrots down for the horses to trip over, and this painting here that this one guy got distracted by. So when I got to the ending boss fight, I had my hands kind of full here. Man, I've always been into the Wild West as a setting. It's probably because I grew up like watching Westerns with my dad. Like, you know those old like 60s and 70s Westerns where they all use the same set and they all look like the exact same. And I just love the main character of the Sundown Kid. It's like clearly trying to be Clint Eastwood or something. And he's got sass, man. And I just freaking love it.
It's not that you hate milk, but that you can't stomach it, unless it's fresh from your mother's tits.
Your mother's, maybe.
Dude, this chapter is just bonkers. It is wild. It is like super anime. But yeah, this chapter just owns its weirdness. Like there's like a big steel titan that you're gonna go fight all these airships and people with. There's like liquefying people. Oh yeah, your partner's a turtle robot. No, I mean literally a turtle's essence put into a robot. And then there's also the fact that they want to take all of the people's essence and they want to stick it in the bird god robot at the end. You know, just like a typical Sunday. In this scenario, I was also kind of mixed on, so like, I like the setting. Almost feels like Earthbound to an extent. Like, I feel like there were some similarities there. It kind of felt like what the 90s thought the future would look like, and then like the future is here, and it kind of just looks the same, and it's boring. Now, the main thing about this one is you play as this orphan who then also has the power to read minds. So there's also that. So this is like another one of those scenarios where you feel like you're kind of invested in the storyline, but then the whole thing gets drugged down by the fact that you just fight the same things over and over again, and they're not hard, and the combat's not challenging in this chapter at all, because you're just throwing the same attack out over again and over again, and I said that wrong. But then you have this like incredibly vocalized song called Go Go Steel Titan by this guy's name who I can't pronounce. Why the hell was this not playing in more of the game? Alright, so that was all 7 of the chapters, and to no one's surprise, there's an 8th chapter that you unlock at the end of it, because you got this character up here who's on the box art. So the Middle Ages chapter is kind of another one of those like really typical JRPG kind of scenarios. So you play as a knight who's up and coming in the ranks. I think his name is Orsted? I don't think that's right. And I'd say this is probably the most traditional of the bunch of like all these chapters. So you play as a silent protagonist until he doesn't become silent anymore, which that was kind of a fun twist. They were kind of going the whole like Link from Zelda route, and then, you know, he actually spoke, and you're like, oh, that's different. You actually have a personality. But man, this chapter does something I'm so over. I've done it, and I don't want it anymore, and that's random encounters. Random encounters are just like a product of hardware limitations, and I'm over it, dude. Like, let's just move on. But I don't know, maybe I'm talking to my ass when I say that, and maybe you like random encounters out there. I don't know, I don't, so I'm okay if they go away. But, you know, I'm not the only person who exists. And you know it is definitely a medieval age JRPG when people have dialogue like that.
Rejoice, Lucrece, for patron gods part sky to save a final day of King's Contest.
What?
I would say overall, I really like the Middle Ages storyline though. Like, I did really enjoy it. It's kind of like super traditional, but it's also familiar, and it kind of feels like you're sitting back and wrapping yourself in a big blanket of comfort. It's the one chapter that definitely, in my opinion, has some of the most interesting exploration, because you feel like you're getting enough of a difference in, you know, atmosphere here to justify it. And I didn't really feel like the combat was like super lackluster or anything. I felt like there was a good enough challenge going throughout it the whole time that, you know, I was having fun. I was having a good time. And there's a big spoiler that I kind of want to talk about, and I kind of don't, because I really don't want to ruin it for anybody, but I feel like I need to talk about it anyway. So if you're still here, thank you for watching. But I really don't want you to listen to this because I don't want to spoil it for you. So to no one's surprise, the creepy side character who's actually your friend but actually kind of not, ends up being the bad guy. And then a big old fat double twist, you end up being the bad guy. And that was awesome. This I did not see coming at all. So like, Orsted, if that's how you say his name, I still have no idea, basically feels betrayed and like no one really gave him a fair shake, and he did everything that he needed to do, and he was pissed off, so he became the bad guy, renounced his knightship, if that's how you say it, declares himself the new Lord of Dark, Odio, and just shit hits the fan. So if you were paying attention to what I said earlier in the video, with the name that he just dropped, you can maybe figure out what's actually going on here and how this all wraps up. But that's where I'm going to leave this video off today, because I don't want to ruin anything else. If you're really interested in this game, please play it. It was actually pretty good. It wrapped up really well. Like, I want to talk more about how the game ends, but again, I really don't want to ruin it for anybody else or give them any temptation to sit here and listen to me talk about it, because honestly, at the end of the game, I pretty much have nothing but good things to say. Really enjoyable, super fun. Overall, I do really like the game. It definitely has its low points. It definitely has these feelings of like, wow, this was definitely made in 1994. But yeah, again, this game is not super long either, so if you feel like you need an RPG fix and you want something different, very highly recommend this game. Too many RPGs nowadays, in my opinion, feel the need to hit some like 50 or 60 or 70 hour quota, and thankfully this isn't one of those, because I ain't got time for that. I mean, someone's got to run this horse.